Kingdom Hearts is probably one of the riskiest franchises in gaming. Donald Duck showing up in a game with Cloud and Aerith isn't exactly a recipe for success. Even Nomura himself stated he didn't expect the first game to be the classic that it is. Yet, it proved to be one of the most exceptional installments in 2002. Many critics praised the risk it took with the unlikely pairing of Disney and Final Fantasy. What should have been the cringiest aspect was its most endearing. What they least expected was that its sequel was going to take even more of a chance. Chain of Memories really is both the safest Kingdom Hearts game as well as the riskiest one. In one sense, it retreads a lot of old ground, repeating all the same Disney worlds. But at the same time, it introduces a completely new battle system with cards. Now, Square had a reason for this. Considering Chain of Memories, otherwise known as COM, was being made for the GBA, Nomura felt the card usage fit the console's limitations better than what had been in place for the PS2. Numerous testers also confirmed that it worked well with the GBA's 2D environment. But what really confused me about the original Chain of Memories was how it required you to buy a new console just to play it. Because of this, there were so many people that dismissed Chain of Memories as a spin-off since it was on a portable console, and were confused as fuck when they played the second game on the PS2. So, Square had a solution for this and tasked the Osaka Team branch to create a PS2 remake known as Chain of Memories to be released in North America on December 7th, 2008. And it's probably one of the most controversial titles in the series, mainly because the attempt to integrate the 3D environment of KH1 with the card battling system didn't have the smoothest results. In fact, a lot of people said it made a system that was difficult to get into even harder to understand. Personally, I don't think Recom is that bad. Don't get me wrong, it's a deeply flawed game that to an extent is a watered-down version of KH1, but it's the best game Osaka has ever made. Maybe that's not saying much considering their other titles, but hear me out. I feel this game doesn't get the credit it deserves. I guess I'll begin with the most hotly contested part of the game, the card-based system. When Sora and the gang are led inside Castle Oblivion, all their memories are converted into cards. This ranges from his abilities to the worlds he visited in the past. At first, the card combat is annoying if you don't know what you're doing. Since this is an Osaka game, enemies tend to break you out of combos without any rhyme or reason. Now, with Chain of Memories, this is more acceptable compared to something like BBS or DDD, because it actually provides tools to mitigate this, but it's still very much annoying. But what's even more irritating are the map cards. Basically, in order to progress, you need to use these cards of the same corresponding value to enter a locked door. The problem arises if you don't have the proper map card, then you have to grind the map by fighting a lot until the game decides to reward you with the one you need. So, say I need a card of 3 or greater, and I don't have it. I'd have to fight through multiple waves of Heartless to get it to drop, and sometimes they won't do so until after several play sessions. You might even have to reset the console several times if the RNG is really not in your favor. However, if put under a microscope, Chain of Memories' gameplay system is actually only complex on the surface. If looked at more in depth, the card battle system is easy to exploit. Basically, the game has a special feature known as slates that can be activated with a combination of 3 cards. If you're able to get a certain value with this combination, then you'd activate an ability, which includes moves like Sliding Dash, Blitz, Sonic Blade, or a special attack with a party member. There's such a huge variety of slates to unlock, and it's a lot of fun arranging your deck to activate the strongest ones to unleash some big damage. This is why it's important to upgrade CP over anything else, as the more you have, the easier it'll be to stack the most effective slates to use over and over again. And, as a side note, CP stands for card points, not redacted, and that's kind of where the main problem starts to emerge. For there will be 1 or 2 slates that will be so overpowered compared to all the others that you'll just perform it over and over again. In the early game, Blitz is just broken. If you're able to land 3 finishing hits on a boss, then you probably take out a decent amount of their HP. Therefore, you'll probably just prioritize stacking Blitz within your deck so that you can activate it constantly. Just find the right cards that add up to 11 to 15 that are of a different type, and voila! You can just spam it. It changes ever so slightly in the mid to late game. For Sonic Blade breaks the game even further. Basically, you can string together multiple hits as you speed across the arena, stun-locking your opponent. A boss's health melts at the mercy of Sonic Blade. Plus, since the value needed to use it is 20 to 23, many enemies and bosses won't be able to interrupt it except for this one attack Marluxia does. Even though the game gets harder in the late game, Sonic Blade turns it into a breeze. There's no need to experiment with any of the other slates. Well, maybe that's not necessarily true once you've discovered Lethal Frame. You really have to go out of your way with this one, as you need a calm bounty in Wonderland to get the Stop card. Once you've done that, then you have one of the most overpowered abilities in your hands. If there's one drawback with Lethal Frame, it has a very long wind-up to get it going. So, make sure to combine it with high-ranking cards to make it difficult to break. Now you may ask, well, what about all the other slates that you get in the game? Surely you don't have to play the game with only those two. That's somewhat true, but there's one problem with it. It feels too inconvenient. There's no other slate in the game that has as high of a damage ratio and card value as Sonic Blade and Lethal Frame. Sliding Dash and Strike Raid don't hit as hard. Bambi's Idle Romp just confuses enemies without dealing any damage. Cloud's Cross/Plus just has him remain stationary while he delivers multiple blows, which allows some enemies to have a better chance of dodging him. Perhaps a possible counter to this argument is that Freeze and Raging Storm do a substantial amount of damage. However, some ice and magic-based enemies are immune to it, and if you're using low-value cards, they can easily be broken. That's right, both Raging Storm and Freeze are more dependent on the card you're using rather than the value. Granted, you could go to the Moogle shop to get higher-ranking versions of these cards, but the problem with the store is that you buy a pack of cards, and what you get out of each one is completely random. Say you're looking for a higher-ranked Cloud card, so you choose the pack where he's most likely to be in. Well, there's a 40 to 50% chance that you get a Genie or a Blizzard instead of him, and considering the more advanced card packs are more expensive, you usually only get to do this once per visit. In order for it to show up at the Moogle shop, you need to backtrack to a previous world to find it, and this wouldn't be so bad if they'd made navigation a bit better. Each of the rooms that Sora traverses in looks so similar that I constantly needed a map to make sure I was going in the right way. While it's true that the map cards change up the rooms ever so slightly, I found that this was mostly limited to enemy behavior, the presence of other items like chests or Moogle shops, or the value of the cards that either Sora or the Heartless have when entering a battle. Of course, this being a KH game, the only saving grace going for this is Yoko Shimomura's score. All the old tracks from KH1 sound just as good as before, and even though they're mostly repeats from the first game, Yoko never failed to make an engaging score. But sadly, music can only do so much to lessen the repetition. They did sort of try to mitigate some of the tedium through the addition of enemy cards. They each give their own distinct advantage. Oogie Boogie can restore some of your health, Riku Replica's card can allow you to keep the first card of your slate, Ursula can weaken the strength of magic-based attacks, and Genie Jafar can prevent your cards from being broken. They all take up a decent amount of CP, so you need to prioritize the ones you want to keep, and this is where the same issue of dominant strats creeps in, as there's only a handful of enemy cards that are particularly useful. the Soldier card providing an extra hit to your combo, or Vexen's ability to revive you are nice in some situations, but they're not as good as Genie Jafar and Oogie Boogie, which are both really good in all circumstances. Maybe if you come across a Neo Shadow card, you'll throw that one into the mix too, as it has the ability to drain an enemy's health away. But I'm sure you can see the problem here. On the surface, there's so much variety, yet you'll find that there are one or two options that are more optimal than everything else, and the game allows you to play it safe instead of encouraging experimentation. However, in the midst of all this, there's one saving grace, and that's this game's sound effects. Every time the Keyblade struck something, I could feel the impact. It makes it feel like I'm actually punching my foes. Sure, Sonic Blade gets really repetitive after a while, but boy is it satisfying as fuck being able to toss somebody like Vexen around like a hapless ragdoll. And I guess this transitions well into Riku's gameplay, as it's very much focused on brutality and dealing heavier damage. He has a fixed deck, so you don't have to rearrange it like Sora's. This actually makes his gameplay more fast-paced, since you don't have to stop and organize your cards every once in a while. He can just reload his deck at the press of a button, whereas Sora needs to hold down on a tab for several seconds, which allows him to get out of some tight situations quickly. All that being said, despite the improvements I mentioned, Riku still feels just as tedious as Sora. Maybe a little bit more so, considering he can't really learn any new slates. Some of the new features Square added make up for this repetition. One of these is Riku's new Dark Mode, which is very similar to Dark Jack from Jak and Daxter. In fact, maybe Kingdom Hearts sort of got some inspiration from that series, as Dark Riku works very similarly. For all the times Riku breaks a card, a meter at the top right starts to fill up. Eventually, Riku will automatically shift into Dark Mode with a brand new deck of cards, as well as being able to pull off some sick slates. It's kind of like his Super Saiyan mode. He has all the abilities from his boss counterpart, and it almost serves as a reward for beating Dark Riku's ass so many times as Sora. There is one drawback to this mode though. For every time one of your cards is broken, or Riku takes a hit, he'll lose a little bit of his dark meter. Once it's completely empty, he reverts back to normal, just like Dark Jack after he takes a single hit. Overall, just having the luxury of being able to play as the boss with his entire moveset is a real treat. I mean, Birth by Sleep gave us the opportunity to play as the Lingering Will, and we weren't able to get any of his moves from Cage 2. What's ironic is that both Recom and BBS were made by the same Osaka branch of Square. If you guys were able to do it once, how come you weren't able to do it again in a later entry? The other new mechanic is card dueling. The final boss fight against Marluxia sort of introduces this, in which you had to break all the cards to free Sora from his Doom spell. With Riku, if you manage to break a card of the same value, you can engage your opponent in a duel in which you have to knock away all their cards before time runs out. If he fails to do so, he'll be taken out of commission until an enemy deals damage. If he succeeds, Riku will unleash a devastating attack. It's a very nice risk versus reward minigame that is a break from the traditional combat. It might be a little mindless, as you just have to mash the X button and hope the card of the right value hits it, but if done correctly, it can give the upper hand in a losing battle. Therefore, the duels serve a purpose, and the devastating attacks you pull off are really satisfying. Unfortunately, I can't quite say the same for the 100 Acre Woods. And I might get a lot of flack for saying this, but the minigames all just feel like a hurdle that you need to cross, as most of them force you into different playstyles that have nothing to do with the core gameplay. Except for the one where you had to protect Pooh. Knocking the cabbages and pumpkins to their respective sides wasn't too bad once you got the timing down. As mentioned earlier, defending Pooh from bees was mostly in line with Sora's card-based combat and managed to hold my attention. It's just those other ones that were problematic. The one where Sora has to slowly ascend a tree with a balloon while collecting points was frustrating. I swear there were times where I was just barely touching a branch, and that would be enough for a balloon to pop. Not to mention it has BBS's favorite word. It's just too floaty. The same could be said for the Tigger memorization game. Personally, I always hated games where you had to memorize the sequence of actions, and this was no exception. But for its shortcomings in the gameplay department, Chain of Memories makes up for it with its story. Well, maybe a good story doesn't necessarily make a game a quality product, but it certainly helps me keep playing. After a quick recap of the original installment, Chain of Memories picks up exactly where the last one left off. Sora and friends encounter Pluto and run off down a pathway to figure out what was inside the note he had with him. Eventually they lose track of him, and Sora encounters a cryptic figure in a black cloak who gives him a very vague message that in order to claim something he needs, he has to lose something dear to him. I was kind of hoping that we'd learn about what was inside Pluto's note, but okay. Continuing on down the path eventually leads the trio to Castle Oblivion. They all have the same thought pop up in their heads that they'd probably find Riku and the king within these walls. However, upon entering, they quickly realize they've lost their abilities. In fact, all of their memories have been corrupted, now coming into form of cards. The higher they go in the castle, the more memories Sora, Donald, and Goofy lose. This has nothing to do with a gimmick the castle has, for a witch named Namine is manipulating their memories behind the scenes. Later in the series, it's revealed she's Kairi's nobody, but we're not supposed to know that right now. She isn't doing this out of malicious intent though, for the black hooded figures known as Organization 13 are forcing her to do it and holding her hostage. Basically, Sora needs to keep climbing the castle in order to stop Organization 13 and to save Namine. In a way, this is similar to a survival story similar to the Hunger Games. In this case, Marluxia is like President Snow because he's toying with the underling that is Sora and forcing him to partake in a little side quest where he's got nothing to gain. And before you say Kingdom Hearts isn't as violent as Hunger Games, well, it's pretty close. Larxene slaps Namine, who, mind you, is a little girl. Riku Replica chokes Zexion. Axel scorches Vexen to death. And Sora literally kills the organization members. Yeah, you know the innocent boy from Destiny Island that's always so cheery and go-lucky? He fucks up quite a few of his foes without mercy. In fact, he's taken quite the character overhaul in this game. The guy gets fucking pissed. It's probably the angriest I've ever seen from him. He threatens Larxene after she tries to break Namine's good luck charm. He abandons his two best friends, Donald and Goofy, after they try to warn him that he's getting too edgy, and he hyperfixates on Namine like a guy struggling with OCD. Now, of course, it's implied that this has something to do with Namine's magic, but I've always wondered if part of the explanation behind his behavior was because he's missing that crucial piece that is his nobody Roxas. In Cage 2, he had to recombine with Sora in order to make him whole again, so I wonder if his absence had anything to do with Sora's fits of rage. They actually managed to find a balance between Sora's cheery side with his more angsty transformation. It still feels like he's generally very spirited, despite the fact he's slowly losing his mind. Like, in this game, he watches in horror as some of the organization members are executed. Seemingly the guy he believes to be his best friend turns on him. His memories are being shuffled around. He should have PTSD by now. Yet, when he confronts the person who manipulated him, he doesn't lash out at her. Instead, he forgives her and says that he'll continue to protect her, stating that even though his promise was based on a lie, it felt true to him. Like, what? What is this banana bullcrap writing? He doesn't even sound remotely angry. I guess Larxene really did a number on him. But my favorite aspect in Sora's angsty personality is how it affects his relationship with Donald and Goofy. Throughout the game, Donald and Goofy are the voice of reason as Sora traverses the castle. They constantly suggest to him that it's probably best to turn around and go back, only for Sora to shut them down. It gets to a point where Sora just storms off after one argument, having had enough of Donald and Goofy holding him back. And during their absence, the game goes out of its way to show that Sora is alone. With all his memories gone, Donald and Goofy really were all he had left. And to emphasize their lack of presence, you can no longer summon them during this segment of the game. Previously, you could bring them to your side in case you ever needed a helping hand in combat. Them not being there to assist might seem like a minimal factor, but it places more weight behind Sora's loneliness. He only has a bunch of fake memories, and this is shown with his conversation with Namine. He's confused, and the scene demonstrates that without Donald and Goofy to guide him, he falls for these illusions. And finally, during his confrontation with Larxene, if Donald and Goofy hadn't been there to save him, he would have been killed. Chain of Memories isn't afraid to show how vulnerable Sora is. My friends are my power is no longer just a saying. This game actually shows the true value behind that statement. But besides Sora, Donald, and Goofy, Chain of Memories introduces a host of other characters. They were really building up the Kingdom Hearts universe with this game. You've got an introduction to the Nobodies, Memories, Replicas, and so much more. I guess one of the most prominent new characters are the Organization members. So I consider these guys to be similar to Bionicle's Paraka in the sense that they're all working for a common goal but really don't like each other. Each of them can also be categorized as a stereotype. Larxene, otherwise known as the Savage Nymph, is a plain bitch. For all the people that like to simp for her, nah. This motherfucker ain't it. Kicking Sora in the gut while threatening to smash Kairi's lucky charm and slapping Namine's face is enough for me to hate this piece of shit. She has no empathy for others whatsoever, but I'll say she looks thick in the black coat. Vexen, otherwise known as the Icy Academic, is a scientist who narrows people into numerical values, viewing Sora and Riku as test subjects. However, one of his subtler traits is that he's obsessed with his seniority. It sort of shows how he's insecure of himself and adds a hint of narcissism to him. His voice is so ear-grating, which is a good thing considering I can beat him up without feeling guilty. I always had a pang of sympathy for the academics, considering that I myself was one that had a lot of trauma being bullied. But Vexen is such an insufferable twat with his bragging and arrogance that he's more or less an exception. Someone who's somewhat of a contrast to Vexen is Zexion, the cloaked schemer. He's the nobody of Ienzo. Fun fact, apparently in the GBA version of this game, we didn't know what his weapon was, but Recom revealed that it was this book called the Lexicon. He also has an uncannily good sense of smell, considering he's able to pick up both Sora and Riku's scent. I'd probably say that he controls one of the more unique elements among the organization. Whereas someone like Vexen uses ice to represent his cold nature, Zexion is a master of illusions. He tries to manipulate Riku into making him fall deeper into the darkness by disguising himself as Sora. I guess this makes him even more evil than that of Larxene or Vexen, because while the latter two mostly physically hurt our protagonists, Zexion tries to mindfuck and vaporize one of them with a beam of light. Eventually he gets what's coming for him, for Riku Replica delivers what is perhaps the most brutal death in the game via strangulation. Seriously, it's sad that many of these guys cheat death in Dream Drop Distance. As evil as they were, I always thought there was a tragic element when one of the organization members died. They're essentially just leftover bodies after their hearts separated from them. So, with them being an empty shell, when they're killed off, they seemingly fade into nothingness. Really, Dream Drop Distance? Why did you have to retcon this? But, going to the other members, up next we have Lexaeus. One aspect that I really appreciate about him is that he isn't a cliché stupid muscular dude. Lexaeus always has a bit of serenity to him, with his head bowed and eyes closed. He's the type of guy who you wonder what goes on inside his head. However, don't be fooled by this, as he has an enraged form he enters into, kind of like the Incredible Hulk. It's sad that this guy didn't get more screen time. I think he could have had a lot of potential to be an interesting character, considering that he's one of the more soft-spoken members of the organization, so I can imagine that he would have been subtler with the ways he approached things compared to the rest. But it appears that Square didn't really know what to do with him, and offed him just like that. Yeah, I'm sure you're starting to see a pattern with these organization members. They don't have much depth, so it's hard to figure out what to talk about with them. The two exceptions to this are Marluxia and Axel. The former is the main antagonist. He basically wants to take out all the other members within the castle so that he could have Sora for himself in order that he might use him to take over the organization. He appears to be the only guy with any level of self-awareness, as he doesn't particularly trust any of his cohorts, and even sends Axel to kill Vexen. However,
it was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
Yeah, Axel wasn't the most trustworthy of individuals, considering it's revealed that he was acting as a double agent. While it seemed like he was on the same playing field as the others, he was actually tasked with killing all of them since they were all suspected to be traitors to the organization. This makes Marluxia relatively short-sighted. Like, he's the classic villain who believes that he has it all figured out, but his arrogance blinds him. That, and let's be honest, he's pretty hot. And leaving the best for last, we finally get to Axel. He's probably the most likable of the members, as he isn't brooding and cold-hearted, and actually has a sense of fun to him that doesn't involve abusing his subjects. That being said, his playfulness masks his true intentions, as he's the one who eliminates all the members, or at least puts them in positions to get them killed. In a sense, he mirrors that of an assassin, since he uses different traits, such as his levity, to make himself appear as the least susceptible to conflict, which allows him to take his foes out by surprise. I guess it's fitting since he leads the assassin nobodies. Of course, during the happenings of this game, he's friends with Roxas, and they sort of demonstrate how this relationship with Sora's nobody affects the way he looks at him, as seen with the way that he tells Larxene not to go too hard on him. Obviously she doesn't listen. It would have been cool if they'd explored this more, like maybe Axel would subtly berate the other members for being so brutal when handling Sora, or after Sora completed each floor, he'd show up to try to guide him on what was coming next. In fact, they sort of do this a little bit in one or two cutscenes, such as the one where Axel offers to extend an olive branch to Sora when they first meet, but I feel like there was more that they could have done in terms of his interactions with him. But all that aside, the organization members are pretty serviceable villains that are a credible threat to our protagonist. Although Sora isn't the only one fighting them, for Namine and Riku are also struggling against them. So I'm just going to say this off the bat, Namine is underrated as fuck. So much attention goes to Aqua being the strongest female character, but Namine doesn't get too much credit. Sure, she spends a lot of time being protected by the male characters, but there are times in the game where she tries to stand up for Sora, and even at one point manages to save Riku from Zexion's illusion. She's also one of the few female protagonists in the series that has a clear-cut character flaw. She deals with a lot of loneliness, and the organization is able to exploit that to have her manipulate Sora's memories to make him believe that she was his best friend at one point in time. The best part about this is that she takes responsibility for this by putting his memories back together instead of having somebody else do it for her, which makes her an active character over a passive one. Now, if there's one complaint that I had, I do wish the game delved into more details about her character. I like how they merely hinted on her being Kairi's nobody, as seen with her one conversation with Axel.
You have my sympathies from the heart. But don't waste your time. We nobodies can never hope to be somebodies.
But there were some mysteries that required answers, like how did she get captured? Was she born in a castle after Kairi lost her heart? Why was she so sensitive to loneliness compared to everyone else? Like, she goes through an arc, but without knowing certain details about her, it feels somewhat incomplete. Comparatively, Riku's arc is much better defined. As he ventures through the castle basement, we really observe the despair he feels, having little to no company except for the harassment from Ansem and the organization members. I do like how instead of beating the darkness like the traditional Judeo-Christian narrative, he grows to accept it as a part of himself. In a way, this whole finding balance between two extremes is more in common with Buddhism. Now, there has been a lot of debate in regards to whether if Sora and Riku are gay, and I say that there are some good arguments on both sides, but there's no denying that Riku's journey to acknowledging the darkness is very much an allegory to a queer man accepting himself despite what society says. Hell, there's one scene where Namine offers to erase the darkness out of Riku, and that can be read as something similar to conversion therapy, and Riku turning away from that choice demonstrates how he's rejected that line of thought. Granted, Namine didn't have any malicious intent like the majority of conversion therapists. She's far too innocent for that. There's not really a whole lot to say with the replica. He's a very tragic figure considering that at the end of the day, he's just a tool for the organization. He kind of gains his own conscience towards the end, but even then, It's said that protecting Namine is the only thing that he really knows. Plus, he's constantly reminded that he's a fake, and therefore doesn't have any real personhood. And the game has some brutal ways of showing how this perception affects him, such as when Larxene tortures him when he screams for her to stop, demonstrating how she views him as a mere toy, or when he dies and wonders aloud what's going to happen to a fake like him after death. Yeah, let me remind you, this game was rated 10 and up, and it has a scene where the Riku replica is literally dying while asking existential questions. Now, a lot of people are going to ask, does a good story save a bad game? And I'd say in Chain of Memories' case, no, not really. There are so many people that say in order to best experience this game, you should watch the cutscenes on YouTube or play it on beginner. I'm sure that's very telling of how difficult it was to get into the brand new gameplay. Like, these people are essentially saying to find other means to enjoy it that doesn't involve purchasing it and popping it in my PS2. After all, what makes games so unique compared to movies and books is that you get to play them. But having said all that, I decided to give this installment a chance, as I think it has enough going for it that a lot of the problems I mentioned earlier become easy to brush aside. The story is quite good, and it's best to enjoy it while playing the actual game. Besides, watching all the cutscenes on YouTube is simply not the same, since you'd have to deal with so many ads interrupting the movie. If you're having trouble with the card-based combat, remember to just get Sonic Blade and Lethal Frame, and the game becomes a cakewalk. You might suffer from extreme boredom spamming the same slate over and over, but at least it's better than being confused over this game's mechanics. Seriously, for all its problems, the writing in Chain of Memories is the strongest in the series, so you'd best want to enjoy it authentically. But maybe some of you might not agree that the story is enough to carry Chain of Memories. Please leave a comment and maybe we can have a healthy debate. Anyway, I'm Dave Reviews. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed the video, as that encourages me to keep making these, and I'll see you guys next time.